Hello and welcome back to Joe Bailey Revision. This lesson we're going to be doing about Croxden Abbey, which is our local history project. So let's start. Croxden Abbey. So the first thing we're going to be going through is the attitudes and values of the people surrounding the place. So, as you'd guess, it would be highly religious, due to it being Abbey, a place full of monks. So, the power of the church was very strong at the time, so ordinary people, such as the guy who set it up, Bertram de Verdun, thought, if I'm not a good person, I'll end up going to hell. Because in that time they believed in heaven and hell, and if you were bad, you'd go to hell. So basically, he set up this abbey because he thought it would help him get saved from hell due to fear of no redemption. And this would be because it was a religious place, and the monks would pray for him and his family. It was widely believed by people at the time that the prayers of monks were incredibly strong because of what they go through to be monks. So yeah, de Verdun wanted to save his soul, basically. So let's go through the next bit. So the Cistercian monks, they were highly religious. So they prayed 8 times a day, and they wore white clothes to symbolize purity. And the Cistercian monks followed the rules of Saint Benedict, which involved uniformity, so they all had similar buildings, so almost every abbey looked sort of the same, except some were bigger, some were smaller, but we'll get through that later. They all wore the same clothes, of course, the white habits. It was also the idea of having no possessions, which was them living in poverty. And also they lived away from the outside world, so they were free from distractions, and this is why it was so important for them to be self-sufficient, as we'll find out later why they were in certain places. So, another thing linked to religion, it was sort of due to religion that this entire place was destroyed, if you think about it, because it was about when Henry VIII broke from the Catholic Church due to wanting his divorce. So, due to that, the entire country became Protestant. Well, you could see it as he was trying to shut them down to get money from them, but you could also see it as the religion. So you could put both in your answer. But the dissolutions took place by Thomas Cromwell. He was ordered by Henry VIII to shut down all these abbeys. And basically, this abbey we're talking about, Croxden Abbey, was shut down later than others due to paying a £100 fine in 1536, and £100 was a lot of money back then, a lot more than it is now. So they gave most of their money just to stay running for an extra 2 years, but it was shut down anyway. You don't want to go against this dude, he's pretty scary. Anyway, okay, let's go on to the next topic. So now we're going to be talking about the buildings and the site. So basically, in 1176, the site was originally meant to be at Cotton, another place, but the abbey was moved in 1179 to Croxden. Why was this? Well, it was mainly because it was offered by de Verdun. He said, you can go here, but also there were certain reasons why it was picked, including how isolated it was, how fertile the land was, how good the water supply was, and how much forest there was. These 3 things here would allow the place to be self-sufficient. If you had water, you'd be able to drink the water, you'd be able to wash things in the water, you could do anything with the water, that you would have to get it from somewhere else if you couldn't. Same with the land, they could grow their food, they can grow their, farm their animals, so yeah. Other things about the building and site, the entire thing was full of wooden buildings until they were gradually replaced by stone buildings. You can see this as the church was completed in 1253, which is quite a time after it was set up. That was around the time of peak activity when the most monks were there. So another thing that happened to the buildings, the roofs were destroyed in 1538 due to the dissolution, making it no longer habitable, meaning all the monks had to go away. So let's look at similarities and differences to other abbeys. So the other abbeys we looked at were Fountains and Revue. So let's have a look. So the similarities, they were all built next to water sources, which is of course important for the self-sufficiency. They were all shut down in the 1500s, showing truly the scale of this man. They all had a similar layout, so they had a chapter house in one place, a cloister in one place, and a warming house in another place. This was supposed to be so a monk could go from any of these places and they'd still know their way around. So differences to Fountains and Revue. So some differences were that Fountains and Revue, because they were bigger, they had extra buildings such as bell towers, a misericord, and guest houses. They also had a bigger size, so they were more important, which led to them having more remains, because there are very few remains at Croxden compared to these massive ones like Fountains and Revue. Also, different designs were present in all the different places. For example, I'm pretty sure none of the others had these radiating chapels that Croxden had, because Croxden was originally, the mother abbey to it was in Normandy, so it has Norman design. Next, we're going to go through the topic of daily life. So let's start with some important roles in the abbey. Who were the important people? Well, I think the most important was probably the abbot. He was the monk in charge of the abbey, so he basically ran most things. The prior was the second in command, and he had control of discipline, which is pretty scary. The lector was in charge of reading at the church. The cantor was the leader of the monks' choir. The cellarer was in charge of the food and drink, and the lay brothers, and we'll get to the lay brothers later. They are very important in how the abbey managed to stay around. Also, the sacrist was in charge of the books, and the monks wrote books while walking around the cloister, and that's how they spent most of their time, apart from, of course, praying. So let's go across here. So monks, we can prove a lot of things the monks did by the buildings. So we can prove they prayed a lot because there's a church there and it's massive. We can prove that they looked after sick monks because there's an infirmary. We can prove they helped the poor because of the almshouse, which is around the gate. We can prove that there was bloodletting because of the warming house. And if you want to use these sorts of things in answers, you got to sort of put where they are as well. You got to specify that, get you those extra marks. All right then. So, lay brothers. Who were the lay brothers? Well, they were the guys who did the manual labour and the farming. We can prove they did the farming due to the fertile fields which were around and would be needed to run the abbey. Also, they had separate dorms, and the church was separated by a rood screen on which we know that the lay brothers would stay on one side and the monks would stay on the other. However, the rood screen is not there today because it's wooden, and yeah, wood doesn't last that long. So we've gotten through most of the big topics about the big things. So basically later history. So we know that later it was used as a private residence. As we can see, the remains of gardens at the site. And they're not like actual physical trees, but they could tell that there was gardens in these places when people have done archaeological digs and stuff there. So also we know it was sold to a guy called Godfrey Foljambe, something like that, in 1545. If you can use the names of these people, that will also help you a lot. We also know that sometime after that it was run as a farm, because the farmhouse is there and still physically present, and you can tell from the building design that it is over 100 years old, meaning that from at least 100 years before it had been used as a farm, and I'm pretty sure that farmhouse is still running, so that's pretty cool, I guess. Also, English Heritage now own the site. They've owned it from 2008 to now, and it's open to the public. So that's pretty good for us. Friday, let's go. Only real G's will get that one. You know what I'm saying. Anyway, let's move on. Written evidence. So what sort of written evidence was there? Well, first there was the Croxden Chronicle. And this was started to be written in 1288, meaning its primary evidence. And it ended in 1374. But the fact is, this isn't when the Abbey shut down, so we don't have the entire timescale of things that happened. Also, it goes back to 1066, even though the writer couldn't have possibly been alive then, so we don't know how reliable the data from before that point would have been. Also, it does help us in some ways because it talks us about many important events, such as when certain buildings were damaged. However, it also gives us stuff about less important events, like the weather, which we don't really need to know much about. And also, it gets sort of untrustworthy in many points due to them saying the weather was bad omens for stuff, and there's a lot of superstitious writing in there that may not make much sense to a modern reader. So another thing that there were is English Heritage reports. So these were basically reports done by English Heritage after they got the site by using archaeological digs, which makes it sort of reliable, because using archaeology, they can't have put something there if it wasn't already there. It has to have existed. However, it was done in the modern day, so we can't be entirely sure about what was there from a certain time. Also, there's a lot less about daily life in this, almost nothing. We can't really learn a lot about these people's lives just from what the building looked like and its physical structure. So we know about its uses and changes from this. We don't know much about the actual monks. So another thing we can look at is reconstruction paintings. So basically reconstruction paintings are paintings done at a later date by artists, and one thing that would make them sort of reliable is that you have to do a lot of research before doing one of these paintings. Also, a great thing about them is they show us the inside of the Abbey, whereas a lot of the other stuff we've got, writing things and maps, don't really show us what's really in there, you know what I mean? However, of course, the fact it was done at a later date and the fact that some assumptions were made while drawing the thing would make data slightly unreliable, if not quite a bit, to be honest. I mean, assumptions, don't like assumptions in history. Anyway, let's move on. So, 1911 map. So what's this? So, this guy called Charles Lynham drew a map in 1911 of the thing, and it took him many years to do. And he was a local architect, which makes it reliable, because he obviously cared a lot about this subject, took a long time on it, and he knew the sort of stuff he was talking about by being an architect. One annoying thing about it, though, is it kind of doesn't tell us about the actual physical appearance, it just shows us where things are. But showing us where things are can be useful for a lot of things. The layout, because he gives us like the relative size as well, not just where things are, which is very important to our understanding of it today. So yeah, that was Croxden Abbey by Joe Bailey Revision. Hope you liked it. Joe Bailey signing out.